Happy Monday. John Lorden here with your weekly episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked. Today, Christy has been looking into a case, and I just want to start off this video by saying this is a little bit of a heavy topic, but I think it's a very important topic, and there are some changes that have come out because of this story that are making this world a better place. So we're going to share the story with you, a story that I like to call Jonathan's Law. Jonathan Carey was born on September 12, 1993, to Michael and Lisa Carey. At 19 months old, the Careys' doctors noticed odd behaviors in their son and diagnosed him with autism. Functionally, Jonathan would always be a 2-year-old with a vocabulary limited to daddy and where you going. Autism is a developmental disorder estimated to affect 24.8 million people, with the number of people diagnosed increasing dramatically since the 1960s. Parents usually notice signs during the first 3 years of their child's life. Although the causes of autism are unknown, it is usually associated with a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Early behavioral interventions or speech therapy can help children with autism gain self-care, social, and communication skills. However, many families struggle with finding help and resources to aid in their efforts. The Careys were able to care for Jonathan along with their 2 other sons until he was about 9 years old. At that point, they started to worry that they would have difficulty teaching their son basic living skills. They enrolled him at the Anderson Center for Autism, a privately run school in the Hudson Valley of New York. At first, the school seemed like a good fit, until Jonathan, who was always thin, began losing weight. During one visit, an employee told the Careys to take home a duffel bag that sat unused in Jonathan's room since he had arrived. Inside, they discovered a logbook detailing startling changes to Jonathan's treatment plan. Among other things, the school was withholding food from Jonathan to punish him for infractions such as taking off his shirt at inappropriate times. Quote, "They literally planned to withhold my son's meals," Michael said, "and when that was not working, they then began to seclude him in his bedroom for an extended period of time. He missed 8 full days of school." After that, the decision to take Jonathan out of the school was an easy one, and for the next year, the couple would care for their son at home. But after his difficult time at Anderson, Jonathan now threw temper tantrums for no apparent reason. The doctor who examined Jonathan diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the treatment he had endured at the Autism Center. As time went by, Jonathan became harder to control. He was tall enough to jump the fence that surrounded their home, had no sense of keeping himself safe, and became increasingly hard to handle. About a year after he came home, Jonathan had what his father described as a full emotional meltdown. The Careys were forced to take Jonathan to a local hospital where he was essentially knocked out with a drug cocktail and restrained in his hospital bed. Running out of options, they were directed to the O.D. Heck Developmental Center for his ongoing care. O.D. Heck is one of 9 large institutions in New York that house developmentally disabled people with cerebral palsy, autism, Down syndrome, and other conditions. The Careys hoped that an institution run by the state would be more promising than the Anderson School. Jonathan arrived at O.D. Heck on October 7, 2005, but by October 29th, the Careys arrived to find their son's nose so swollen that he had to be taken to the hospital. None of the staff members at his school claimed to know what had happened, but speculated that it had occurred during a dental procedure. Soon after that, Jonathan was taken to the hospital with a black eye and a broken nose. That time, the staff suggested that he might have fallen out of bed. On a third occasion, Jonathan was taken to the hospital with severe bruising on both sides of his face. Quote, "They basically told us that he had fallen out of a rocking chair and hit his head on a table, and I said, absolutely not," Lisa Carey stated. As time went on, Jonathan seemed to settle into life at O.D. Heck, but on February 15, 2007, things took another bad turn. 2 staff members, Edwin Torrado and Nadim Mall, decided to take Jonathan and another boy on a trip to the local mall. What should have been a fun day for Jonathan turned out to be the most horrible experience of his life. Edwin, who had worked 197 hours over a 15-day period, was so exhausted that he let Nadim drive that day, fearing he would fall asleep. Unfortunately, this wasn't the simple day trip that the two men described, as there would be several stops made. Before reaching the mall, Nadim stopped at an ATM. When he returned to the van, he noticed that Edwin had restrained Jonathan illegally. Apparently, Jonathan had freed himself from his seatbelt and behaved in a way Edwin thought wasn't proper. Instead of sitting him back down and fastening the seatbelt again, Edwin restrained Jonathan and even sat on him for over 20 minutes while he gasped for air. Even though both men knew Jonathan was having difficulty breathing after being restrained, they continued on to a gas station where Nadim bought drinks. They also went to a video game store where Edwin bought a special bag for his PlayStation. Then they drove to Nadim's house where they smoked and chatted with a neighbor before eventually returning to OD Heck. It was 8:52 p.m. that night before they finally decided to call 911 and get Jonathan help. It had been 2 hours since they had left the mall. Unfortunately, it would be too late for Jonathan. After being transported to St. Clair's Hospital in Schenectady, he was pronounced dead. Michael and Lisa were together when they got the call. "I just lost it," Michael stated. "My wife was yelling and screaming, 'What happened? What happened?' I don't even think I could communicate well, and she finally said, 'Which one?' She realized something had happened to one of the boys, and I said, 'Jonathan,' and we literally both fell under the weight of the grief, collapsed to the sidewalk, just uncontrollably weeping. It's hard to explain the pain and the trauma that one experiences getting that kind of news. You're in a cloud. It's like you don't even know what's going on around you." After police were called, Tirado and Mall were taken to Albany County Jail, where they were held without bond and charged with manslaughter. In their grief, the Careys went to work on their son's behalf, asking for immediate changes to be made to the state system of institutionalized homes and schools. Michael and Lisa submitted a written statement saying that the state failed to protect their son, in part because they did not investigate the charges of abuse at the first facility he stayed at back in 2004. Quote, "Now we must contend with our grief over the loss of our son and the surreal experience of having to bury Jonathan, all because of a broken and failing system," they stated. A spokeswoman for a government office that handles developmental disabilities said that only minimal qualifications were required when hiring a developmental aide, such as reading and writing skills and knowledge of the English language. Training lasts about a year. Criminal background checks and fingerprinting are done as well. She claimed aides were trained to prevent the use of physical intervention with people during behavioral episodes and were educated on developmental disabilities, client protection, abuse prevention, managing behaviors, first aid, and CPR. But OD Heck had been keeping information from its patients' families. Unbeknownst to Jonathan's parents, just 2 months after he arrived at the school, the federal government barred the facility from accepting new residents financed by Medicaid for a year because of its chronic problems. One inspection by the state health department found at least 18 serious injuries of residents in a 5-month period in a facility holding only 57 people. 8 of the injuries, including 5 fractures, were of unknown origin. The health department would conclude that investigating the high number of injuries was not a priority for OD Heck's management. Quote, "There was no evidence that the facility examined the nature of all reportable injuries systemically in an effort to prevent such injuries in the future," inspectors wrote. OD Heck's managers were supposed to complete initial investigations within 5 days of a serious injury, but often left the inquiries open for weeks or even months. Some workers were hardly fit for duty. One had a history of showing up intoxicated, but was kept on the job until he was once so drunk at work that he was sent to a hospital. Later, he was made a groundskeeper. Many workers were often high school dropouts, some with criminal convictions, and as investigators looked into Tirado and Malls' past, they were shocked by what they found. Tirado had been convicted of selling marijuana and, as a youthful offender, for firing a shotgun in his attic. He was also one of 2 employees on duty right before the bruises from Jonathan's 3rd incident were discovered. Tirado had once worked 84 days in a row. A coworker told an investigator that he was so exhausted a week before Jonathan's death that she told someone either he's going to kill someone or himself. A state psychologist also told police that for Tirado, overtime was like a badge of honor. The psychologist added, "I asked Edwin when he slept. He said he didn't." There was little tangible oversight of employees and no restraint on overtime, which employees coveted to supplement their $30,000 a year salaries. David Slingerland, the state official who oversaw Odie Heck, acknowledged that the amount of overtime Tirado had worked was a factor in Jonathan's death. Mall was fired from 4 different private providers, lasting less than a year at each one of them. One employer had accused Mall of sleeping and watching television on the job. Another found him sleeping while a resident's thumb was bleeding profusely. He was let go from a 3rd job after being accused of calling 1-900 sex lines using a company cell phone, and from a 4th job after he inexplicably had a hairdresser cut off all the hair of a disabled woman in his care. With that background, he was still hired by the state. Mall also stated that he heard Tirado tell Jonathan as he restrained him, "I could be a good king or a bad king." Even though Tirado denied making the remark, another employee had heard him make a similar comment before. Quote, "Odie Heck failed at every single possible level," the Carey's lawyer stated. "It was a disaster waiting to happen." All of this was hidden from the families of Odie Heck's residents. If we had any clue that Odie Heck was in this shape, do you think that we would have ever put Jonathan in there? Jonathan's father would ask. An autopsy found the cause of death to be compressive asphyxia, which means that so much pressure was put on Jonathan's chest that he could not get enough oxygen into his lungs, causing him to suffocate. Before Jonathan died, Michael, an evangelical Christian, would make regular missionary trips to Africa. After his son's death, he largely gave up his business and now devotes his life mostly to advocacy for the developmentally disabled. The efforts of he and his wife made it possible for Jonathan's Law to be passed. Jonathan's Law was signed into effect in May of 2007. This law allows parents and legal guardians access to the records of children in state-run facilities and also requires facilities to notify them of abuse, neglect, or other potentially harmful incidents within 24 hours. It also expands access to written reports and other records related to the event and increases fines for noncompliance to $1,000 per day and up to $15,000 per violation. Vulnerable patients are at greater risk when their parents and family members are kept in the dark, Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli said. Jonathan's Law can only help prevent tragedies if abuse and mistreatment in mental health facilities is properly reported and actions are taken. State officials must do more to ensure facilities are meeting requirements. Just 2 years after Jonathan's death, Tirado and Mall were sentenced in court. In October of 2007, Tirado was convicted of second-degree manslaughter and sentenced to serve 5 to 15 years in state prison. Mall, who pleaded guilty to a count of criminally negligent homicide as part of a plea agreement, only served 6 months in county jail. In May of 2012, Edwin Tirado applied for and was denied parole. Michael stated, "Justice was served. As Jonathan's state caregiver, Tirado was supposed to protect and care for my precious son, not brutally kill him. Tirado already escaped with a light sentence of 5 to 15 years for killing Jonathan, who was an innocent child and extremely vulnerable because of his disabilities. Jonathan is tremendously missed every day. All that he needlessly suffered in the 3 short years living in residential care will help hundreds of thousands of other people with disabilities. We miss Jonathan every day, and we are so proud of him. Our hope is that all people with disabilities will be treated as special and valuable and have all the basic safety measures put in place to protect them." Case cracked. Thanks to the New York Times for their excellent coverage, as well as Times Union, Angelized Place, Daily Gazette, and Wikipedia for information contributing to today's episode. The Careys continue to fight for the passage of other laws, including one that would require surveillance cameras in facilities for the disabled and their vehicles. I really don't think that's a bad idea. In particular, putting surveillance camera in the vehicles. I know having surveillance cameras in the actual facilities, like in their bedrooms and things like that, certainly seems to be a privacy issue. But looking at this story in particular, I really wish they had some type of surveillance camera in the vehicle. And why not for vehicles that are being used for excursions like that? I think that only makes sense. The family did also win a $5 million settlement from the state in 2011 in a lawsuit. Their attorney said the settlement represented an acknowledgement of the state's culpability in the boy's death. They have also started Jonathan Carey Foundation. And on behalf of myself and my amazing supporters out there through PayPal and Patreon, we have already made a donation to the Jonathan Carey Foundation to help this family continue their fight to increase rights and provide better monitoring of people in this situation. Anything that helps avoid a situation like Jonathan went through, I think, is worth it. And that's a big part of the reason why I wanted to be sure to share this story with you guys today. I know it's a tough one. No one wants to hear about a child being treated this way, especially a child with developmental disabilities. But I just think the message is too important. And a big thank you to everyone that supports me and helps keep me here so that we can make donations to causes like this. I really appreciate having you guys there. Before I end today's video, I want to thank a new patron, Deidre O'Brien. Thank you so much for joining on Patreon. If you guys want to also support the channel, you can do that over at www.lordandarts.com. You can support on Patreon, PayPal, buying merchandise, all of it's there. And I really appreciate it because it helps us do great things like we did for today's episode in making that donation. Take care, everyone. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you back here on Wednesday with a brand new episode of Searchlight on the Lord and Arts channel.